worst off because you did this to me. No, well, look what you did to me. I'm the one that's worst off. No, I'm worse off. Let me paraphrase again. No, I'm the biggest victim. 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 They're both fighting to be the biggest victim. They're both fighting to see who's actually the most hard done by. They're both fighting for the bottom rung. What's that all about? Okay, let's talk about how to diffuse conflict. Now, in this video, I'm just going to give a bit of an understanding around what conflict is and how it develops, and also stay to the end where I give away 10 top tips of how to diffuse it if you find yourself within it. Now, I believe conflict is one of those things that the majority of the population do everything in their power to try and avoid. Now, the thing is about conflict is that people don't understand that actually you can have a disagreement with somebody and it not lead to conflict, but avoiding everything that might lead to conflict leads to things like people pleasing, it leads to dysfunctional behavior, it leads to passive aggression and a whole heap of other unhealthy behaviors. Now, we all meet people that we get on better with than other people. However, to go through life and only meet people that you really connect with and see the world in exactly the same way is unrealistic. However, it's okay to have disagreements with people. It's okay to have different opinions to people. It's how those opinions that differ are managed that makes the difference. So you can easily have a healthy conversation with somebody where you completely disagree with each other without it resulting in conflict. But most people seem to have it in their head that if they have a disagreement, it will result in conflict. Therefore, I must get on with everybody, which basically is a form of people pleasing. Now, in my opinion, very few of us are natural de-escalators when it comes to conflict. Most of the time, people have one of two reactions to it. They either become very submissive and very passive just to make it go away and just to make this argument stop, which generally means that the one person has suppressed everything and that's going to come out in some form of passive aggression later or another form of conflict later. Alternatively, other people almost immediately go into this disagreement with almost punching gloves on and they have to win. And this normally leads to something blowing up in a much more distorted way quite rapidly. So what actually happens when two people get into quite intense conflict is one person generally starts with some form of intense energy that comes across as quite abrupt or aggressive. So they come in at this level, then the other person kind of trumps it and comes in at this level with a heightened level of energy and a heightened level of intensity. And then the other person goes above that and the other person goes above that. And it just tends to carry on escalating. Both people are fighting for top rung. Actually, if you break it down, neither of them are actually fighting for top rung. Because what is really happening is that generally when two people get into an argument, they tend to say, yeah, but you did this to me. Yeah, but look at what you did to me. But yeah, you did this to me. Let me paraphrase. No, I'm the one that's worst off because you did this to me. No, well, look what you did to me. I'm the one that's worst off. No, I'm worse off. Let me paraphrase again. No, I'm the biggest victim. 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 They're both fighting to be the biggest victim. They're both fighting to see who's actually the most hard done by. They're both fighting for the bottom rung. What's that all about? So once people actually realize that when they get into conflict and they're so busy attacking the other person for how badly they've treated them or something they've done for them, and then they almost get competitive that the other person has done worse. Once people realize what they're really doing is fighting to be the biggest victim, it might change people's belief and mindset around what's actually happening when they're in conflict. Now, I'm probably going to be stating the obvious here. Now, one of the best ways to diffuse conflict is to not match the other person's energy and or up it to a high level of intensity. Now, that's so easily said than done than actually to do it. And I'm the first person to admit that. And I can't even barely remember the last time I got into conflict personally. However, I'd be lying if I said I haven't been in a conflict where I've been shouting at somebody and they've been shouting back at me. We've all done it. It's a fairly human reaction, but all that does is intensify it. And that argument only goes one direction and it isn't down. However, if you're willing to approach it from a different perspective, and rather than trying to get one over the other person, as in trying to become the biggest victim, you go into it with a sense of curiosity and going with a sense of calmness and be curious around what they're saying, you'd be amazed at how quickly the other person will start diffusing. Now, this is the obvious stuff. I'm going to give you 10 tips later, like I've already mentioned. However, let me give you an example that have happened to me in the last couple of months that isn't conflict related, but it's actually along the same lines, where I saw a huge difference in how I responded based on the energy and what was happening in that moment. So, for example, in the last 6 months or so, I've tried intermittently different martial arts. Now, I started off with Krav Maga. Now, when I went to my club at Krav Maga, basically what happened was the energy in the room was very, very intense. Now, as a complete newbie, it's quite intimidating to go into a sparring session with somebody that when you've never sparred before, going to positions where you're kind of getting pinned to the ground and you've never been pinned to the ground before. But the difference was in my Krav Maga class, the person that led it, and again, there's nothing wrong with this. Every club is different and everything stands to their own merit. And the guy is an absolute genius of what he does. But in the class that I was in, every time we kind of had to do any grappling or any sparring or anything like that, when somebody was kind of the underdog, his response to that was very much, come on, hit him back. Don't be an effing pussy. Come on, be tougher, really, really egging it up. Now, when you're in that environment and you've already got adrenaline pumping through your body and you're already quite intense, and somebody comes along at the time who is the leader as well, telling you to intensify that, it can actually take your adrenaline and that surge of all the energy in your body to a heightened level. So all that ends up happening is that everything goes up. They go up, you go up, and everything becomes a lot more intense. Now, I got injured in those classes. I dislodged a couple of ribs. I sprained a thumb. I actually had a slight fracture in it. I had a couple of other things. And I saw other injuries as well. I saw, her elbows. I saw a broken ankle. Now, don't get me wrong. The club is a very successful club and people in there are brilliant and the coach is excellent at what he does. But that type of energy and that intensive energy didn't work for me. Even though in a real life situation, that adrenaline would be flying around your body, I would rather be able to stay calm in that environment rather than lose my head and get heightened. That personally didn't work for me. Now, let me give you an alternative example. I'd swapped over from Krav Maga, had a couple of months out, decided what I wanted to do. And I've actually recently started doing jiu-jitsu. So it was my very, very first class. And even at the point of making this video, I've only been going 3 or 4 weeks. So I'm still a complete newbie, learning everything and know nothing. However, when it's your very first class, I literally didn't really even know the basics, the mere basics of even how to score points or any moves whatsoever. Now, at one point in this class, I was doing a grapple or a roll, as they call it in jiu-jitsu. And I was actually rolling with the instructor. Now, towards the end of the class, there was a particular move that he had me in, and I literally was pinned to the ground. I couldn't move any limb at all. Now, there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that I was in any harm's way. The guy comes across as very, very kind. He's very thoughtful. He's very gentle, but he's very strict as well. I didn't, in my mind, have any concern that I was in any danger. But when you're literally pinned to the ground, maybe it's just a female thing as well, I don't know. But when you're pinned to the ground, there's almost this involuntary instinct of this fight or flight where you just start, pushing harder and the adrenaline starts flying through your body. Now, at that moment when I was just literally pinned, he must have sensed my energy change where I just started pushing harder and really kind of going for it. And in that moment, he actually just said to me, and like bearing in mind, I had my arms and legs kind of squashed and all like in different angles on the floor. And very calmly, he just said, don't get frustrated, stay calm. Now, look where your left hand is. Now, what can you reach with your left hand? And it just so happened that I could reach his sleeve on his gi. So fundamentally, he was kind of walking me through the types of things that I could do in that situation. But what was really noticeable to me is that if I compare that to the previous classes where maybe somebody much more experienced than me was pinning me to the ground, I'd get this response of like, come on, you effing pussy. Come on, try harder. Go, 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 go. Really quite intense, like up it, up it, up it. And it almost got a little bit out of control because it was just getting more and more fiery. However, in this class, I went from this place of like, oh my God, I got to push harder, I got to drive harder, almost like on the edge of a panic almost, but not actually a panic, obviously. And then just having this complete energy shift from having the alternative person that I was with, just simply staying very calm and just saying, don't get frustrated, stay calm. And it was just the tone, the energy. And I just felt this surge of like every like intense force in my body where I just started going for it, where this involuntary reaction of a fight or flight just suddenly disappeared. And it's a really hard one to describe, but it was the contrast from one to the other was really noticeable for me. And that's the kind of mindset that I want to get into when you're in that panic zone. Otherwise, we just become reactive animals where we've got that adrenaline and we just respond to it, as opposed to actually making a calculated choice around what we're doing, despite our body telling us to do something different. And although what I'm sharing isn't actually any form of conflict in either situation, it's the same kind of context, because when you're in that adrenaline, fight or flight, energy going up, that intensity, it's the skill to be able to just step back from that and go, my body is directing me and basically instructing me to do this, but I'm going to do this instead because it's much more healthy for me, much more It's going to avoid something bad happening. And actually, then I'm back in control. Because if you just become reactive to something that's happening to you, then you're not actually in control. And at all times, regardless of what my adrenaline is doing, I want to feel that I have the control of my brain and my body. So when we're faced with conflict, what we're actually grappling with is a shift of energy inside of us, which is why often we have these really nasty arguments with people and we say things we really regret that are just driven from that energy and that intensity. And then we wake up the next day and we go, oh my God, what did I do? Why did I say that? I didn't mean that. I don't even feel that way, because all that energy has shifted into a much calmer state. So if you can actually apply that when you're actually in the moment with somebody, don't underestimate how much the other person will respond to it, and you're going to help diffuse it rather than escalate it, which fundamentally most of the time is what people want to do. Now, again, I've already said this, but I'll say it again. I know that's a lot easier said than done, but it is an incredible skill to have if you're actually in that situation. Now, just as a disclaimer, I know that it isn't as black and white as maybe this video sounds. There's lots of variables that come into it when it comes to conflict. It depends on how close you are. It depends on what the thing is that's actually happened, how severe it is, if it's happened before, if it's likely to happen again, if you're married to this person, if they're a stranger in Tesco's, if somebody just cut you off in the car, is it a family member? There's so many different variables that I know impact on how quickly things do escalate. However, just as a general theme, I'm going to give you 10 top tips that will help to diffuse any type of argument, that regardless of who you're with, that once you're in it, these are some things that will help bring it back down again. Tip number 1, if you've done something to upset somebody, whether it's maybe you said that you'd go around in the evening and you didn't show up, or maybe you said you'd call the next day and you didn't call, when that person is upset for whatever that thing is, what I see a lot of people doing, which I think is a big mistake, is that they go into this huge, long monologue around all these things that they've had to deal with and are the reasons why they couldn't. So they might spend ages going, oh, if only you knew what I'd been had to go through. This happened with my dog, and my boss said this, and then my mum called and I had to do that, and then my washing machine broke, and then I had to call a plumber and I had to do this. Oh, but I am sorry. Like, if you come up with this huge monologue and then you just drop in at the end, oh, but I'm sorry about that, it doesn't actually land as an apology to the other person. It sounds like you're much more in the motivation of defending yourself rather than actually recognizing how the other person feels. One of the most powerful ways you can do it is simply to say, I'm really sorry I let you down. Or I'm really sorry, you must have felt really that I didn't care. Or whatever it is that you want to say, recognize how you think they feel. As an absolute minimum, spend some time and let them maybe say whatever it is that they need to say, recognize their feelings first. And then maybe later on, you're welcome to go into the things of, yeah, I know my washing machine broke down and this other thing happened. You've already diffused it by that point. They're much more likely to even possibly hear you. But if you start your apology with a whole monologue, which is a massive place of defense, the other person is much less likely to hear you, and it will just take to an intensity, because then they will just feel unheard, and then you will feel unheard because of whatever it is that you've had going on, and they will feel unheard because you're not recognizing how they feel, and it will go up, and there you go, you're both fighting for who's got the worst feelings, and that's how the escalation starts again. So remember, always going first with recognizing how the other person feels if you have royally messed up. Tip number 2. I often hear people say things like, you're blowing this out of proportion. This is ridiculous that you're upset by this, blah, blah, blah. Who made you the judge of what people should or should not be upset by? What you're really saying in this moment is that that thing wouldn't upset you. That thing wouldn't piss you off. But in actual fact, that doesn't mean that the other person isn't entitled to be upset by that thing, because it's very possible that later down the line, you'll be upset by something that they're not. But nobody makes you the judge to tell the other person what they should or shouldn't be upset by. But in that moment, I can guarantee you're going to basically invite conflict. Tip number 3, if you genuinely want this conflict to go away, then also look at not ridiculing, humiliating, devaluing, belittling the other person's opinion or judgment. The moment you do any of those things, you're basically inviting further conflict. And if you are doing those things, you have to truly ask yourself if you really want the conflict to end, because those behaviors actually encourage further conflict. Okay, tip number 4, don't just storm off. Many people seem to think that this is a real great thing to do. It's actually a power struggle. It's classic behavior of passive aggression. And by just storming off, you're much more likely, if the other person has any sense of feeling rejected, you're going to press that button for them. You're going to be pressing their rejection button, most likely enticing further conflict. Now, that isn't to say carry on fighting it out until it gets completely out of control. It could very easily be something along the lines of, look, I can see that you and I aren't actually getting through this conversation at the moment. We're not really listening to each other. How about we just have 20 minutes apart? We calm down, we get back together, and we complete this in a calm way. That isn't storming off. That's completely respectful to you and respectful to the other person. But just by literally storming out of the place, it's passive aggression. You're going to trigger the other person's rejection, and you're much more likely to go back into a much more heated conflict later. Tip number 5. Now, very few people get into conflict that escalates into a full-blown argument. And like maybe if they start losing their shit or they start saying things that are really quite aggressive or nasty, very few people wake up the next day and go, yeah, that was awesome. I handled that brilliantly. I'm so proud of myself. Unless you're a bit of a dick, nobody's really going to be waking up and thinking that and feeling that way. So tip number 5 is basically imagine yourself as a fly on the wall. Imagine watching yourself in this situation. What would you be looking at to think that was brilliant? I'm really proud of that. What would you be doing differently to what you've done historically? Okay, tip number 6. Take accountability for your part in this conflict. Now, one of the problems that we're faced with is that when two people often get in a conflict, they get gung-ho on blaming the other person. The other person becomes 100% responsible for how they're feeling and for this mess that they find themselves in. So actually taking accountability for the thing that your half is, or at least your part of it, is actually a very powerful stance. And this includes even if something has happened to initiate this conflict that had literally nothing to do with you. So, for example, you're parked and somebody drives past you and they scratch your car or something. Okay, maybe nobody's been killed or anything. Now, I do understand why people would be quite irritated and quite upset by that. But do you get out and just tell the person that you're upset and you take their insurance details and then you deal with it like an adult? Or do you get out and stab them in the face or punch them in the nose or something? How you react to whatever thing that you're faced with, even if it's massively provocative, you are still accountable for your response. And that's the part that even if other people respond in an angry way, you can still be responsible and accountable for how you react to their response. And that is going to be the key difference if something escalates or is diffused. So always try and take accountability for the part that you are responsible for. Tip number 7. Watch out for your own confirmation bias. And what I mean by that is that if this other person has a particular behavior trait that you find a bit frustrating, you're much more likely to notice it as and when they demonstrate it and discount the times that they don't do it, and you're not going to notice those occasions. So every time you see it, it's just going to be further and further confirmation. What also then happens is that generally people start using extremity language. You always do this. You never do that. Everybody does this. And it's always this extreme. Now, if you're in conflict with somebody and you use this extremity language, the chances are the other person is going to go straight into a defense and provide evidence of the times when they didn't do this thing. And then you end up arguing about whether they did or they didn't, rather than the fact that this thing has happened that actually upsets you in the first instance. So just be wary of your own confirmation biases and also be wary of your extremity language. And these two often go hand in hand. Tip number 8. Try and stay mindful of your body language. If you're in conflict with somebody and you're sat there with your arms crossed and you're looking away and you won't make eye contact and your face is all scrumpled, the other person will pick up on your body language that you're basically, there's no sense of this thing being diffused, and they're much more likely to think, I'm still at war. I'm going to have to go in harder again. And it kind of invites that further conflict. I know it's easier said than done, but if you are in conflict, try and keep your body language a bit more loose, not so defensive with it crossed. Try and make as much eye contact as you possibly can. And also your tone of voice will also make a difference as well. Tip number 9, don't interrupt. Now, I guess there is the pushback that somebody might say, well, what am I meant to do if the person I'm talking to or having conflict with literally monologues at me for 20 minutes? Okay, I understand that argument. However, just appreciate that in a decent adult communication, even if it is quite intense, then both people have a bit of airtime. You both have to share that time. But if you're on the receiving end of somebody's intense energy and they're really angry and whatever it is that they're saying, and then when it comes to you speaking, they just shut you down. Basically, the message that person gets is, A, I have to sit and receive all your tense energy. And secondly, I don't even have a chance to express myself. It's just going to be much, much more provocation. Now, interrupting is one of those big things that does happen in conflict. If you're interrupting them, it's going to be very hard to ask them not to interrupt you. So try your best to share the airtime. Both have a say in what it is that you're discussing, but interrupting, try and knock that on the head. And tip number 10, last but not least, is that try and remain curious. Now, I know this is more easily said than done, because when people get into conflict, they go into this place of blaming and trying to get one over the other person, etc., etc. But actually, if you go into a place of curiosity, you're much more likely to understand the other person. They're much more likely to feel understood, and much more likely, therefore, to have a level of curiosity about what it is that you're feeling and saying as well. But without having any form of curiosity, you're in a place of dominance. And I'm just in this place of like, I must get my point across, and you will listen to me, and you will back down, and you will surrender. Now, if your only way to actually resolve an argument is the expectation that the other person surrenders, then I actually question if you're truly in the place of wanting to have conflict resolution. This is not about being passive. This is not about being a doormat. But it is very, very important that when you're in these types of situations, that somebody takes the lead to try and diffuse it, if you genuinely want to diffuse it. And if you've watched this far into the video and you thought, I'm not going to give any of those things a go because none of them will work, then I'm going to gently challenge you and actually ask you to question if you truly, genuinely have the motivation to want to diffuse the conflict once you find yourself in it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did take anything from it and you are going to implement it, I'd love to know how you get on. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell to make sure you get all future content. And other than that, have a great day. Cheers.